Hi, so welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Playbook. And as you can see, I'm here solo. And that means, we're doing a different format of episode now. And the reason why we've done some eight brilliant reviews of episodes for the Women's Euros with eight excellent guests. But unfortunately, we were not able to find for the remaining eight countries. And we thought, why deprive the viewers about information about the other eight countries? And so me and Sai decided let's record individual episodes like this, like a short bite, like 10 to 15 minutes, letting everyone know what is special about women's football in these eight remaining countries. Now, uh, Sai has already recorded the Norway video, and I'm going to do Denmark. Look, there's a pretty much a Nordic theme here, as you can notice. Now, let's begin by speaking about Denmark as a country, right? Denmark, you would think of Denmark as this country which is normally at the top of the happiness index, pretty much a place where equality reigns free. And yeah, like you would think that is the case. And the place of the Little Mermaid, etc., etc., and a place where you would think that women's equality would be at the foremost of it. But if you were to venture back more than 50 years back, it is not the case. Now you imagine, okay, you're standing on the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, one of the largest stadiums in the world, and you are surrounded by a sea of 110,000 roaring fans. Now, this is the most number of fans at any women's sporting event in history. Now, keep that in mind. And this is in 1971, mind you, September 5th, 1971. And they're witnessing a 15-year-old schoolgirl whose name is Susanne Augustesen. And she single handedly scored a hat trick to lead Denmark to a 3-0 victory over the hosts. Now, this is a host country, right? They were playing Mexico in the final. And now you might be asking, what is this the final of? It must be a World Cup, right? Like from the way the stage it is. It is a World Cup, but with a twist. It is the unofficial Women's World Cup. Now, see, this is the state of women's football 50 years back, which is, you can say, maybe less than maybe two generations ago. And that's because the women's football was literally banned in a bunch of countries, even in Denmark, for instance. Now, you would think that a person who scored a hat trick in such a large stadium in front of 110,000 fans would be remembered today. But unfortunately, Augustus her name is not known by people in Denmark itself, forget anywhere around the world. So this is Denmark, and this is the Women's Heroes edition of our Beyond the Playbook episode. And here, decided to do it in like four segments. Okay, the first segment would be about the history of we chronicle the history of football in Denmark, women's football in Denmark, and then second we're going to spotlight a particular person from Denmark, a particular player from Denmark, past and or present, who fought against the odds to represent Denmark on the international stage. And then segment three would be about a more general uh, theme about the culture of Denmark. And then segment four, we're going to retrospectively talk about Denmark's performance in the current 2025 Euros and how they fared and how they probably are at the wane. So let's go back to the 60s. The late 60s were a time of rebellion on the streets and on the pitch. You had the Beatles, you had a lot of political uprising, you had the Vietnam War, you had the anti-war protests against that. And also in Denmark, there's another fight which is being fought. The Danish Football Association didn't have any official women's teams. Now, Copenhagen's BK Femina answered an invitation to the first unofficial European Championship. So thereby they planted Denmark's flag in international women's football as a result. And in 1970, Denmark, they had gone to Italy for a second unofficial World Cup. So in those days, there was no World Cup. In fact, the first World Cup was not even called Women's World Cup was not even called the Women's World Cup. It was called the Women's World Championship until uh, very recently, when it is called the World Cup as it is. Now, in 1972, Denmark traveled to Italy. They overcame the hosts again. So this is before 1971. So They overcame the hosts in a 2-0 final. But, so this is the second unofficial World Cup. Now, in the third unofficial World Cup, which I referenced earlier, the one at the Estadio Azteca, it was it was a trip which cemented Denmark's place in women's football history. Now, when Augustesen scored her hat trick goal, or the third goal, and it hit the net, the Mexican crowd, this is literally against their team, and the Mexican crowd just stood up and applauded her. They were just that awestruck by her poise, power, and her precision of her left foot. That's how much in awe they were of her performance and how she, you know, literally a 15-year-old kid brought their whole team down to their knees in their own stadium and just did this. Now you would think that such a monumental moment would lead to building a lot of building of momentum for women's football in Denmark especially. But those celebrations which happened at the Azteca, it didn't translate into sustained support at home. Now as a result of this, there was a big, huge skyrocketing of participation. So what was earlier a mere 1,500 women's footballers, it grew tenfold to 16,000 women's footballers in Denmark. But you had the Football Association chairman, the DBU chairman itself, just dismissing the sport, women's football, as just a fad. Now you're fighting such opposition at home, and then it takes UEFA intervening. Before Denmark were finally invited to form an official national team. So this happened in February 1972. So basically, more than a year after that monumental moment at the Azteca, by the way. And you would think, a person who scored a hat trick in an unofficial World Cup would be one of the first names on the team sheet, right? But no, Susanne Augustesen, who was the hero of the 1971 World Cup final, she was never capped by the new DBU squad. Now, that's puzzling. Now, we go on to, Denmark's first official international match, and it came on the 27th of July, 1974, in Finland. And yeah, it was a very, a minor 1-0 victory over Sweden by a penalty kick. But, amidst all this, the progress was halting. There was just, you know, there were fixtures which were very sporadic, sponsorship agreements were reneged, and there was a lack of institutional backing. Now, in the case of DBU, they were literally, the chairman was not even interested in promoting the women's game in Denmark. That meant that Denmark's early pioneers or stars, they were playing in the shadows. But they still endured. Despite all this, and they endured in such a way that they qualified for the first women's World Cup, FIFA Women's World Cup in 1991, and they secured bronze medals as well in the 1991 and 1995 European Championships. So this is despite a lot of opposition from at home. But all this still didn't lead to any recognition, both public or financially. And it leads to how those early pioneers, how certain people walked for what is now, what you can see now, people as flying what is now women's football in Denmark in general, or even in the world in general. So now we move on to segment 2 about that, the special person. Now, we're talking about Denmark. Now, okay, we'll go to 1988 parallelly to another side in a separate world. I mean, a separate part of the world, a different side of the world. In Herat, Afghanistan, a baby girl named Nadia Nadim was born. Now, she was born into privilege, pretty well-educated family. That was until she was 9 years old. Now, her father, who was an Afghan army general, was executed by the Taliban. And 2 years later, when she was 11 years old, she and her mother fled, and they ended up in Denmark as a result. Now, Nadim, she discovered football in a refugee camp in Aalborg, and with it, she discovered a sense of belonging as well. She realized that girls could play football as well. What was something which was limited to men or boys, especially in a country like Afghanistan. She discovered that it is more more universally accepted in a country like Denmark that girls can play football as well. And once she became the first, once she became a fully naturalized Dane, she became the first naturalized Dane to be on the national team. She scored on her debut. Now, that's how amazing she is, and she would go on to be sixth all-time scorer for Denmark. Amidst all this, she simultaneously studied medicine, and she became a reconstructive surgeon in 2022. So you would so like Denmark has always been a country which has always had trailblazers. So you had Susanne Augustesen, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who scored a hat trick in a enemy arena, and you have an immigrant, a refugee from Afghanistan, go on to be one of their greatest players in recent history. And amidst all that, she was studying medicine as well, which is one of the most hardest things to study as well. So you think Denmark has always been a place where strong women have come to the fore. Now we move on to two cultural foundations in the Danish culture. So what underpins Denmark's approach. So there are two concepts. One is called Janteloven, and one is Hygge. Now Janteloven, or the unspoken law of Jante, it discourages individual arrogance, and it celebrates collective achievement. Now, as you can see, like from Denmark's many achievements, like the 1991 and 95 European Championships, where they secured bronze medals, when they qualified for the 1991 Women's World Cup, when they came second in the 2017 uh, European Championships against the hosts of the thing. It was always the collective which took them there, and it's demonstrated as well. I mean, they've never been carried by one single individual. I mean, they've had outstanding players. They have had Daniela Harder. They've had Nadia Nadim. They've had many brilliant players, but Denmark has always done well when the whole team has played well, and that's what has underpinned Denmark's success in many multiple you know sporting tournaments until recently. That is so that highlights and Janteloven. And the second concept is Hygge, like I mentioned earlier. So it means Hygge. It doesn't have a proper meaning per se. You cannot translate it into English per se, but it means like more than coziness and warmth. So it means a feeling of belonging, a feeling of community. And as you can see with Nadia Nadim's story, that's what she felt when she played football for the first time at 12 years old in Aalborg. And this is what has shaped Denmark the Denmark women's football team as a result. So these values have always shaped Denmark's teams, always creating this environment where players can trust each other, they support each other, they have their friendships, and family isn't just this word which is just thrown around willy nilly. So now we go on to Denmark's fight for equality. So it reached a turning point with two landmark events. The first one was in 2017, where the women's national team walked out for 2 months. They refused to play for 2 months because they wanted to secure better conditions and equal pay. I mean, or better pay. No, not even equal pay, better pay through a collective bargaining agreement, and they succeeded, you could say. And in 2024, the men's team. Now, this is where they got a lot of support from the men's team that forfeited their salary increase to guarantee equal basic pay and match bonuses for their female counterparts. So this resulted on New Year's Day 2025, the 1st of January 2025, Denmark introduced standard contracts for all professional women players. So it ensured the minimum wages, insurance, and pensions, and it ensured that talent wouldn't, get bled from the local Danish league. So you wouldn't have players from Denmark moving out to other foreign leagues, like the WSL, like the Frauen Bundesliga, like the Femini La Liga. You wouldn't see this this large exodus of talent from the local league, and it ensured that they would stay in Denmark for a little longer until the big clubs of the world, like Chelsea, like the Arsenals, like the Barcelonas, like the Leons, would come and pluck them. But it allows them, those teams, to at least uh, to at least you know do well with those talents which they've discovered, which they have, nurtured. So now we fast forward on to the current 2025 campaign, and it's safe to say that, you know, I mean, to start with, the expectations were very cautious. They were not that big. They were anyways drawn in the group of death, of what was supposed to be the group of death with Sweden, Germany, and Poland. And I don't think anyone in Denmark had any hopes of Denmark qualifying from that group, at least ahead of Sweden and Germany for that matter. But there was always this hope that maybe they could punch above their weight if they nick a result here and there against Sweden or Germany, and then it puts them in a good position. And it started off on the in the first match day against Sweden, July 4th. They were just beaten by Sweden. It was a very narrow victory for Sweden, and they were just beaten by a Filippa Engeldahl strike in the 55th minute. And the keeper Maya Bay Ostergaard made a lot of key saves to keep Denmark in it. And as usual, Pernilla Harder tried her hardest to pull Denmark back into the game as she rattled the crossbar later on, but it wasn't enough. Now, this put them on the back foot straight away, especially after Germany's victory against Poland. Now they have to get a result against Germany. And on the second match day, they did, they started off the blocks really quickly. They took the lead. They scored first, through Amelie Vangsgaard. And they were leading at halftime. But then, Germany with the talent advantages they had, with the substitutions they had, they came back in the second half through Sjoeke Nusken's penalty and Lea Scholler's winner, and they sealed the comeback victory, and thereby they sealed, Denmark's elimination to qualify for the quarterfinals. Now, the third match day, I think all Denmark had to play for was for pride, and they were playing against the tournament debutants, Poland, and I'm sorry to say, Denmark they bookmarked what was a very poor campaign for them by losing to Poland, handing Poland their first major tournament win, and even their first goals also in the tournament, with a 3-2 win for them, with historic goals from Natalia Padilla Biras and Eva Pajor. And what was, a close scoreline of 3-2 was not really that close. It was a very one-sided game in favor of Poland, and there were a few late strikes from Yanni Thompson and Signe Brun, which ensured that Denmark didn't get beaten that badly from Poland, and they ended up finishing bottom of the group without a point. So so if you look at the journey, 1971, they captivated 110,000 Mexican fans. They literally prompted the Mexican fans to stand up and applaud them up. That's how dominant their performance was to 2025. They had a very poor campaign in which they exited without getting a single point. So it shows that there's a lot of lessons which remain to be shown. So I would like to conclude by saying, from Augustesen's Azteca hat trick to Nadim's journey from the refugee camp to the football pitch to now what would eventually be the operating theatre now, Denmark's women's football story has been one of transformation, resilience, and values. Now, the 2025 Euro campaign may not have delivered the desired results, but the culture which they've cultivated of Janteloven, Hygge, of equality will always be a guidepost for future Danish teams. And as Denmark's captain Pernilla Harder and her teammates process their exit, they carry forward a legacy that transcends wins and losses. It's about inclusion, collective growth, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance. And the real victory lies in continuing to build a society and a sport where barriers are broken and pioneers are never forgotten. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Beyond the Playbook. I'm Ashish. Until next time, keep the spirit of sport alive in your communities and beyond. Thank you. And please like, subscribe, and comment on this video. We would greatly appreciate it.